Well, hey there, and welcome to the Bridge Online. If this is your first time here, a huge welcome to you. My name is Chris, and my goodness, you picked a phenomenal Sunday to be here because we are starting a brand new series called Know Thyself, and it's really all about who God created us to be. And if it is your first time here, we would love to get to know you a little bit better. So why not jump in the chat? If you're watching on Sunday, you can do that. Jump in the chat, say hello, let us know where you're watching from. Or you can click the New Here button, or better yet, do both. Say hello in the chat, then click the New Here button. We'd love to get a little bit of information about you. We'd love to follow up with you personally this week, and we'd also love to send you a free gift. If you're in the Ottawa area, we'll have that delivered. If you're outside of the Ottawa area, we will ship it to you. But we'd love for you to click the New Here button. Well, as I always do around here, we're going to kick things off with a song. And this song is called Let the Redeemed. It's really all about just how thankful we are for all that Christ has done for us. So it sounds like a great place to start. Let's go to the band.
Let me out of the desert, brought me into his streams, river of living water, turned my bitter into sweet, and all my burdens lifted. He took the shackles off my feet. There's no sound louder than a captive set free. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Sing of his promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. There is joy in the morning, springing up from my soul. There is life worth living, 'cause he calls me his own. There's a hallelujah after sweet victory, and there's no sound louder than a captive set free. No, there's no sound louder than a captive set free. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Sing of his promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. You are my deliverer, the freedom I'm living in. You are my deliverer, you are my promised land. Oh, you are my deliverer, the freedom I'm living in. God, you are my deliverer, you are my promised land. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Sing of his promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. And I'll never be alone anymore. How could my voice be quiet? You're my deliverer. You're my deliverer.
Such a great song. Well, if you are watching this on Sunday morning, it is a Valentine's Day. Hopefully that's not news to any of you watching, and happy Valentine's Day to all you lovebirds out there. But truth be told, it's been a long time since most of us have had a date with our spouse, hasn't it? You know, we are in the middle of a pandemic. If you are in the Ottawa area, we are still in a lockdown, which means no restaurants are open, no movie theaters. I mean, we can't even go get our hair cut for a date. So it is a little bit rough around here, but hey, we want to do our best to give you an opportunity to have a date with your spouse, and also to be able to have a few follow-up opportunities to learn more about each other and to really strengthen your relationship. So we are teaming up with the Alpha Marriage course to bring you 7 weeks of awesome marriage building dates. So we are going to be providing that down the road, but we just wanted to let you know about it today so you can kind of keep an ear out and make sure that you listen in the weeks to come as we give you more information. But right now, I'm going to turn things over to Jeremy as he lets you know some things you need to know for this week.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Well, my name's Jeremy. I'm one of the pastors here at The Bridge, and recently my wife and I went on a walk, and on this walk, we talked about the subject of arguing, and how oftentimes when we argue, it feels as if we're coming at things from completely different positions. Even if we're arguing about the same thing, it feels as if we're not even speaking the same language. Well, in preparation for this new series that Scott is starting called Know Thyself, we looked up or took the assessment for our Enneagram numbers, and I'm a 4 and she's a 1. Now here's what's interesting. We looked at how 4s and 1s relate. And it said this sentence that when 4s and 1s are in conflict, it often appears as if they're coming from things in polar opposite positions. I tell you, what was really interesting about that is it gave us some perspective into how we operate both individually and as a couple, and it allowed us to have an open, honest conversation to figure out, okay, well, how do we argue better in the future? So we're excited about this series for a couple of reasons. Number one, we get to explore together how God has uniquely made each and every one of us, and how each of those unique persons, who we are, is brought together as a whole in the body of Christ. And what we want you to do is to be able to not only find out your Enneagram, but also join together with others in conversation, whether it's your spouse or people in your family, or maybe you've got a bubble, you can get together with them, or even just get some friends together and jump online or outside in your backyard. And we've created a group discussion guide that gives you questions each and every week based on what Scott shares on Sunday, to be able to go through and to explore these things and how we relate to each other and how you understand yourself. So we encourage you to go and download that resource, bridgechurches.ca/groups. You just scroll to the bottom, you'll see it there. Click on the Get the PDF button, you'll fill out a form, and we will send it to you. And we hope that over the next 4 weeks, you will be able to explore a little bit deeper on how God has made you and how that impacts the way that you understand who you are and how you relate to others. That's it for me. I'm going to send it back to my buddy Chris for a few more announcements. Take care and have a great rest of the day.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, and I cannot wait to dive in with my small group. And thank you to all of you who give week after week so generously to the mission and vision of the Bridge. Because of you, we are able to offer things like the small group experience. Because of you, we are able to offer things like this date experience. Because of you, we are able to do so many of the things that we do around here. We keep saying it, but it's just so true. Our building is closed, but the church certainly isn't. And God is working in incredible ways, and thank you that we are able to do all that we are able to do. And if you'd be interested in giving to the mission and the vision of the Bridge, there are 4 ways you can do so. The first is you can mail a check to our church. Secondly, you can go to our website and click the Give button. You can use our Church Center app, or you can text the amount you want to give to 84321. And again, thank you to all of you who give so generously and partner with the mission and the vision of the Bridge. Well, we are going to go back to the band for one of my favorite songs they do called Who You Are to Me. And it's really all about the personal relationship we have with Christ. So let's go to the band.
Oh yeah. Some people think you're distant, just some words on a page, that you're nothing more than fables handed down along the way. But I've seen you part the waters when no one else could pull me from the deep. It's who you are to me. that everybody does. And I wonder when I stumble, am I still worthy of your love? But I know that I get stronger when I'm talking to you down on my knees. You're everything I need. You're amazing, faithful, love's open door. When I'm empty, you fill me with hunger for more of your mercy, your goodness. Lord, you're the air that I breathe. It's who you are to me. Who you are to me. You're forever holy. You're the Lamb who is worthy. My forgiveness, my healer, the Messiah, my Redeemer. You're amazing, faithful, love's open door. When I'm empty, you fill me with hunger for more of your mercy, your goodness. Lord, you're the air that I breathe. It's who you are. You are greater, higher, over it all. In your presence, Jesus, I stand in awe of your mercy, your goodness. Lord, you're the air that I breathe. It's who you are to me. That's 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 who you are to me.
If everyone would just follow the rules and stay home unless absolutely necessary, don't hoard toilet paper or hand sanitizer, share, make sure everyone has enough, it would be fine. People getting toilet paper and Clorox and hand sanitizer and putting it on Amazon and racking up the price is just really infuriating to me. If you can sanitize your hands, but your neighbor can't, you're gonna get it. I guess I homeschool now, and I have a chart. It's color-coded. 8 to 9, breakfast time. 9 to 10, math. 10 to 11, reading. 11 to 12 is lunchtime. 12 to 1 is some screen time and mommy alone time. 1 to 2, 2 to 3 will be 3 to 4, 4 to 5.
I miss my friends. Oh, I do. I miss them awfully. It's so hard not to have anybody to wait on. I've started this really fun check-in system. It's kind of like a game where I text the people I love and care about on the hour just to make sure that their needs haven't changed at all in that time and that they have access to everything they need. I've started getting a lot of new number who dis though. Oh yeah. Oh, I got in line for toilet paper like everybody else. And then I took it and I brought it to the street corner with a big sign that said free TP. Need a roll? Take a roll. It was a real fun afternoon. People would stick their hands out of their cars and I would just throw them a couple rolls of toilet paper. I just wanted them to know that no matter what happens, I'm gonna be there making sure tushies stay clean. So I just mass made a whole bunch of enchiladas and I left one at every single doorstep in my neighborhood. Rules are rules, you gotta stay 6 feet away, so I've started doing a pop-in system where I rap on the windows loudly, flail my arms like this, and, just let them know I'm out there in the yard. If they need anything, they can ask me in American Standard Sign Language. I speak it.
Need a roll? Take a roll. That gets me every time. I love that. Anyway, it's great to be with you today wherever you are as we kick off this brand new series called Know Thyself. And to give you just a little bit of the backstory for this series, over the last couple years, I've been asked a question, the same question for years, and it's a question that I didn't understand, let alone know how to answer. And here's the question I've been asked, and maybe you've been asked a similar question. Here's the question: what number are you? What number are you? And I'm like, what? Like, huh? What number are you? I don't know. They're like, are you a 4? Are you a 7? I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about. I've never thought of myself as a number. I don't even like math, so I don't have a clue what you're talking about. I mean, what do you mean? And they're like, what number are you? Are you a 4? Are you a 7? Are you an 8? Are you a 5? And I'm looking at them like a deer in headlights, and I'm thinking, I don't know. And then most recently, as I was talking with a few of the staff members about, upcoming series that we were going to do as a church, what we're going to talk about, the idea of talking about this subject, the Enneagram, it came up. And so I said to myself, I was just like, okay, self, which is what I say to myself. I call myself self when I talk to myself. And I'm like, okay, self, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to find out. Like I've been asked this question. I've heard people talk about it. I'm just going to find out what number I am. So I did. I went online and I took an assessment and I found out what number I am. And I also heard some buzz, especially over the last, 6 months, maybe even the last year. I've heard a lot of buzz about this book, The Road Back to You. And I heard about this book, and so I did what Chris talked about last week. I went on to Amazon. And speaking of Chris, if you missed last week, you need to do yourself a favor. If you weren't able to be with us, if you haven't watched On Demand yet, you need to go to the On Demand section of our webpage, because Chris, last week, he shared a powerful message last week, and I would really encourage you to take some time to go watch that. But anyhow, he talked about Amazon, and so I went on Amazon, and Amazon showed up to my house again, and they dropped off this book, and I started reading it, and I couldn't put it down. I haven't been able to put it down. And the reason I haven't put it down is because in combination with my assessment, this book has taught me so much about myself. The good, the bad, the ugly. And so here we are now doing an entire series on this, talking about what the assessment and what this book says about me, and more importantly, what it says about you. Now, prior today, before hearing me mention the Enneagram, or before last week and seeing kind of the build-up for the series, have you ever heard about the Enneagram? Have you ever heard of it? Have you done an assessment? If you haven't, if you don't know anything about it or what it is, let me tell you, you're not alone. In fact, the majority of the people that I asked about this leading up to this series, the majority of people I talked to had no clue. They had never heard about it. So whether you know anything about the Enneagram or not, or whether you even believe in God or not, here's what we're going to do together for the next few weeks. We're about to embark on a journey together, a 4-week journey of self-discovery and God discovery. That hopefully this series is going to be a bit of self-discovery and God discovery, and hopefully by the end of the series, you'll know thyself better than you did before the series, and you'll discover to a deeper level, or maybe even for the first time in your life, maybe you'll discover that you're here, not just in this world, but in this very service, not by accident, but you're actually here for a reason. And so it's for that reason that I'm really glad. We're glad as a team. We're glad that you're here, and we want to explore these ideas over the next 4 weeks. And during this series, we want to help you answer the question, right? The question that we've asked in the last series we just did, and the question that you've asked at your life at some point in your life, or maybe you've asked it multiple times in your life, or maybe you're even asking it right now. And it's the question, who am I? Right? That's a really good question to ask. It's a question that we've all asked, and it's a great question for you to ask whether you would consider yourself a Christian, a church person, a spiritual person, or not. Okay, wherever you are on that spectrum, this is a really good question to ask. And from there, ask another question. Ask, why am I here? Like, what's the meaning of all this? What's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? Or are we just randomly here? Or are we just the product of evolution? Is there a God? Is there a meaning to this? So who am I? And in light of that, who am I in the midst of this? Like, what's the meaning behind it? These are really good questions to ask. And the questions that I think you should keep asking for, well, the rest of your life. So, if maybe you're a teenager, and as a teenager, maybe you're asking those questions, and I'm glad that you are. Or maybe you're in your 20s, you're in college, you're asking these questions. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that you're asking these kind of questions. Maybe for you, maybe you're in your 30s, maybe you've just started out your career, you're starting a family and you're asking these questions. Or maybe you're a little bit down the road, you're in your 50s, your 60s, and you're asking these questions, or maybe asking them in a different way. You see, wherever you are, questions are important. And I want you to know that it's not only important to ask questions, but it's okay to question. We all have them. We all have them. In fact, many times, our questions are the very thing that we have in common, right? For example, have you ever asked this question, whether you're Christian or not, whether you're a church person or not, whether this is all brand new to you? I mean, wherever you are on that spectrum, have you ever asked this question? And this is the question: what's wrong with? I mean, fill in the blank however you want, but like, what's wrong with, like, if you ever ask that question, be honest. I mean, you have, and maybe you'll do it tomorrow. You'll be at work, or you'll be on the Zoom call, or you'll ask that question. It's like, what's wrong with this guy? You know what I mean? Like, have you ever asked that? Like, you're working on a project with a team at work, and like, what's wrong with this girl on the project? Like, what's wrong with her? Or you're in the grocery store, and you see that person in front of you at the checkout, and you're like, what's wrong with her? Like, you're talking to yourself, and like, because self, that's how you talk to yourself, right? You do it too? You're like, self, like, what's wrong? Like, why is she like that? Maybe, you ask your spouse, what's wrong with our son? Or maybe you ask what's wrong with your spouse, but like, what's wrong with this person? What's wrong with my parents? What's wrong with my neighbor? What's wrong with my coworker? What's wrong with my friend? And we go through life, all of us do it, we go through life asking that question in regards to different people. But when we ask this question, what we're really asking is, why can't people be a little bit more like me? Right? It's like, what's wrong with you? Why do you see the world that way? It doesn't make any sense to me. Have you ever been there? Right? I'm sure you have, and if so, the good news is you're not alone. And more than that, the good news is I think that you're going to find what we're going to talk about through this series. I think you're going to find it, it's going to be incredibly helpful to you, okay? And so today, what I want to do today is I want it just to kind of serve as an introduction to this series, okay? This is going to serve as the introduction to the series and to the Enneagram. And at the end of our time together, we're going to show you how to take a self-assessment, okay? But what happens with the Enneagram, again, if you're new to this, you don't know anything about this, with the Enneagram, you get assigned a number, okay? So a number between 1 and 9. So anywhere between 1 and 9, that's you. And then you get a descriptor that goes along with it. So eventually, by the end of the series, you'll be hearing, people in your home or whatever, they're going to be like, I'm a 5, I'm a 7, I'm a 9. Or maybe you'll log on to the service and everybody for the next few weeks will be in the chat saying what the number, I'm a 2, I'm a 1, right? It's going to sound like, Christian bingo in the chat. It's like, I4, right? We don't do bingo right here. But anyway, you get the point. You get to the place where you end up with a number, okay? Now, I'm a 3. I found out I'm a 3, and I'm in love with a 9, okay? So the 9 is the mediator. And the 9 is an interesting number to have. Queen Elizabeth is a 9. Walt Disney is a 9. Zooey Deschanel is a 9, if that name means anything to you. Lisa got really excited about that one. But anyway, optimistic and accepting people tend to be 9s, okay? So Morgan Freeman, for example. Morgan Freeman is a 9, and his voice sounds good to everybody, right? Everybody loves his voice. 9s, these are the people who love people, and in turn, they're lovable. And they like peace, and they'll do just about anything to avoid conflict. And so, again, I'm married to a 9, to an amazing woman, Lisa. And if you know Lisa, you adore Lisa, right? Everybody does, because she's amazing, and she's very different from me. See, I'm a 3, okay? I'm a performer, right? I'm a performer. And as I said, I'll show you how to take the free assessment at the end of the time, our time together today. And after you take this assessment, you don't just get a number and you don't just get like the title, but you also get these results and this kind of thing for you to read that talks about you. And when you read it, if you're anything like me, you'll be quickly drawn to the negatives. You'll be drawn to the unhealthy parts of who you are. And as a result, you begin to have these aha moments as to why certain things play out the way that they do in your marriage or with your kids or with your friends or maybe in the office. For example, the other day, there was a situation that happened where Lisa was dealing with something, okay? And someone in our life, they overstepped a boundary that we had established. So this happens, and Lisa gets in the car, and as we drove away, she started to tell me about it, right? So she's telling me about this, and as she's telling, she's hurt, she's frustrated, and what was amazing to me was she felt those things, but she didn't say anything. And I'm like, what do you mean you didn't say anything? It's like, you're hurt, you're frustrated, and I'm like, how could you not say anything? And see, here's the problem. I was evaluating her response through the lens of my number, through the lens of my personality, instead of understanding that Lisa, she's a 9 and she values peace and she'll do anything to avoid conflict. She'll even internalize her own hurt and frustration. Now, me, on the other hand, I wanted to, pull a Fast and Furious and turn around, and I wanted to have a conversation, a one-way conversation, and address this issue immediately, and that's just one example of how different Lisa and I are. And here's the thing, navigating differences, well, it's the trick in relationships, right? And see, we ended up in this place where we're just different, and what's hard, and what we're going to talk about, particularly in part 3, is that you're gonna say, and maybe you've been here, you're gonna say things like, why aren't they more like me? Like my wife, she should be more like me. And my wife is thinking, especially, like she's thinking more accurately, like, Scott, like my husband, he should be more sensitive, and he should be a lot more like me, and he should keep his hands on the wheel and keep his mouth shut, and she would be right. But see, we're all just different, aren't we? We're just different, and it's our differences. Our differences are sometimes they're what make or what drive us crazy about one another, right? Maybe for you, maybe you're a little bit frustrated with your kids because they're so different. At least one of your kids may be very different from you, and you don't get them at all, and you think, why are they like that? Like, why are you so scattered? Why are you so quiet? So I'm excited about this series. I'm excited about this series because I think what we're going to talk about, and I think what we're going to discover together, I think that it's really going to help you. And that's the goal of this series. The goal of this series is to help you know thyself. That's the goal. We want to help you know thyself. And so as we continue to tease this out, as I said, this is a series about self-discovery and God discovery. And to tease this out a little bit more, I want to talk to you about a theologian who lived about 500 years ago. His name was John Calvin. He lived from 1509 to 1564. And this is a picture of him. Handsome devil. Look at that beard, right? And so he's about in his 50s here, and his eyes are bugged out. He's watched a bit too much Netflix. I can relate to that. But anyway, this is John Calvin, and he was an influential theologian. And he wrote, like many theologians, he wrote prolifically. He was originally a lawyer who turned into a pastor, which, talk about a pay cut. But anyway, he was originally from France, and he ended up living in Switzerland, and again, became a theologian. And he wrote prolifically, and he started, as a result of his teachings and everything, he started what is known as Calvinism. So if you've ever heard of Calvinism, or if you've ever heard of people who claim to be Calvinists, those are people who follow the teachings of this guy, John Calvin. And so he wrote this book starting in 1530, and he revised this book. He expanded on it just about every other year until he died. And the book that he wrote is called The Institutes of Christian Religion. And in it, I'm sure you probably haven't read it, but in this book, he says this really interesting thing at the very beginning, and I want to show you what he says, and this is really odd if you think about it, coming from a theologian, okay? John Calvin says, without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. Again, this is it's an odd place for a theologian to start, right? I mean, wouldn't you think if you're a theologian that you're going to start talking about God, right? You're like, you need to know God, but he says something, this is really interesting, it's really odd, and at first glance, it doesn't seem right. It actually seems a little bit weird. He says, unless you know yourself, you can't really know God. It's like, And then he goes on and he says this, without knowledge of God, there is no knowledge of self. And this is how he opens up. This is the opening pages of the Institutes of Christian Religion. And again, it's an odd, but it's an interesting perspective, that without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God, and on the other side, without knowledge of God, there is no knowledge of self. And so this is an interesting statement. It's one that I want to wrestle with over the next 4 weeks, because even though this is 500 years old, I think it's wise. I think it's a powerful observation, and at the end of the day, I think it's true. I think it's true. And if this is a spectrum, okay, if this is a spectrum, all of us tilt one way or the other. We either feel that we really know God because we're Christians, or we grew up in church, or we're hyper-spiritual or whatever. And then there are others who say, you know what, no, I'm into the self-awareness thing, but I got to be honest, I don't know a lot about the whole God piece. I mean, I don't really know about that. I'm not even sure I care about that. In fact, I'm not even sure if I believe that, okay? So what I want to do today, regardless of where you are on this spectrum, what I want to do today is I want to root this, and I want to be very clear. This is not a series about the Enneagram. Okay, this is not a series about the Enneagram. This is not a series about the Road Back to You book. This is a series about Christianity and the Bible through the lens of the Enneagram. This is a series about you and God. And so I want to start not in this book, but I want to start in another book, the Scripture. I want to start there, and if this is your first time in church or maybe your first time in a long time, this is a great place to start because we're starting on page 1 of the Bible. We're going to start in the book of Genesis, okay? Page 1 of the Bible, and this is the story of creation. Now, maybe you've heard this, maybe you know how it goes, you saw it in the flannel graph in Sunday school, but we're going to look at a few verses, and as we do, I understand that everybody has different views on creation. Some say it was billions of years ago, others say it was thousands of years ago. People question, how did it happen? Were they 7 literal days? But I mean, there's all kinds of debates around that, but let's suspend the debates for just a few weeks. Not that it isn't, good to have those, and they're not conversations worth having, but the thing is, we often get caught up in the what and the how, right? And you can get caught up in that, and you can talk a lot about that and debate that, and we all have differing opinions around those things, but for me, I don't think that faith and science are enemies at all. And I believe that the Bible is not as concerned with, or is far less concerned with what and how, as it is with who and why. And even if you understand, even if you can agree on what and how, you still have to answer who and why. So this series, and today, this is way more about who. Who are you? And you asking the question, who am I? Right? That question. And then, who is God? And why did this all happen? And why am I here? Why are you here? Why am I here? Well, the good news is the Scriptures address that. The Scriptures address the questions we all ask, and it begins in the book of Genesis, and it says this. It says, and then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And that is what happened. So God speaks. God speaks creation into being. And for those of you who are in Enneagram 8, and if you don't know that, you might find that out, you'll love this, right? Because that's how you operate, or at least how you want to operate. It's like, I said something, it should happen, right? Only it rarely works that way, especially if you're a parent. It's like, I told you to clean up your room, and that didn't work either. But with God it worked. With God it works. He just speaks, and it happens. It just all comes into being. It goes on and says, God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind, and God saw that it was good. So creation goes through this series of phases, obviously, and God finishes, and he looks at it and he says, that's good. And if you're a cook, or if you like to bake and you've tasted something you've made, and you're like, that's good, that's what God did. And then it goes on in the 6th day, and then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought there was only one God. What's all this us talk? Well, us. So here's the thing, and this is important. God reveals himself, we believe, as a Trinity. And this is a complex thing to wrap our heads around, which is why he's God and we're not. But God reveals himself as a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. One God, 3 persons. One God, 3 manifestations, which is really interesting. In fact, this is a whole other series, for a whole other time, but we'll do that eventually. But for right now, and this is cool to think about, God exists in community. That's really interesting, because right now in our time, we're probably the most hyper-individualistic culture that's ever existed. And, we look at ourselves and we think of ourselves as these, marvelous, woke, autonomous beings. But one of the things we're discovering today in light of this pandemic is how unnatural and difficult it is to live like that. And here in Genesis, we see why. God exists in community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, held together by mutual love and adoration. And then God says, as he exists in community, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. And so you've got the fingerprint, you have the design of God in you. And then he says, they will reign, which is, in other words, meaning they'll be stewards over. He says, then they will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth and the small animals that scurry along the ground. And so God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. He created them. He created you. You're created. This is so huge. You are created in the image of God. And that's probably why you're asking questions like, who am I? And why am I here? What's the meaning of all this? What's the meaning of life? You're asking those questions because as you look at creation, as you look at all those beautiful birds in the air and the animals over all creation, there's all these different levels of consciousness, right? And they have different levels of feelings and so on. But you and I, human beings, we're unique in that the way we think and the way we feel, we're unique in that. And for us, that's the fingerprint, that's the imprint of God at work in your life and my life, because unlike the rest of creation, you and I are made in his image. And then God blessed them. And he said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. I just love that scurry. I just think that's funny. Then God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And some of us like fruits and vegetables more than others. And then God said, I have given every green plant as food for the wild animals, the birds in the sky and the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life. And that is what happened. I love that. That is what happened. And then God looked over all that he had made, and he saw that it was very good. It was very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. So you know what this means? Do you know what this means? It means you are designed. You're designed, and maybe you don't feel that way. Maybe your parents told you were an accident, but you weren't. I mean, maybe they didn't plan on having another kid, but they did. You thought you were an accident, but God knew all along. Or maybe for some reason you think you're an accident. Maybe you think, there's just random mutation. There's no meaning to life. There's no purpose. But here's the thing. You might believe that, but your question, who am I, contradicts that conclusion. And the commonality in the questioning of humanity, the question, who am I, that question contradicts that conclusion. And the scriptures do as well. God would look at you and he would say, you are designed. God would look at you, he would look at you and he would say, I had you in mind. And before the foundations of the world, I knew that you would be here. See, you are designed. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's how the Enneagram can help us. And so the Enneagram, it kind of looks like this. If you've never seen this before, and so the word Ennea means 9, and gram means picture. So the Enneagram, the 9 drawings, you can see, it's kind of like 9 different components. And every individual, every person has a number, and then each number gets a description. And so you would be, 1 to 9 on a personality type. So essentially, the Enneagram is just like a personality typing system. It's a tool, right? It's a tool. It's of unknown origin. Some people date it back to thousands of years ago to monks. Others would argue, and if you Google it for more than 2 minutes, you might find somebody who says it's the occult. I don't think that. I don't think it's the occult. And there are other people who would say, like Ian Cron here, he would say that it's a spiritual growth tool. Others would just simplify it and say it's just a personality typing system. And if you think about it, most of us have done those before, right? If you've been in the workplace for more than 10 minutes, somewhere, along the way, somebody came to you and they gave you an assessment, and maybe it was, Myers-Briggs, or maybe for you it was the DISC profile. We did the DISC profile here, 7, 8 years ago. We talked about that here. Or maybe years ago you were given a color, or someone told you that you're an animal, like you're either a golden retriever or an otter. There are so many different, personality profiling systems out there. And the Enneagram, at the end of the day, it's just another one of them, right? And I've done most of those other ones that I mentioned, kind of jokingly, but I've done most of them, if not all of them, over the years, and different teams I've been on, or sometimes I've done it for myself, for personal growth. But what I like about the Enneagram, and what I love about this book in combination with it, what I love about them is it's so descriptive, and it's amazingly specific, And as Lisa and I have talked about this, it's eerie how accurate it is. I mean, it really does help you know thyself. And it gives you a deeper glimpse into others as well. And so, in my opinion, at the end of the day, the Enneagram is a tool to be used. And it's there to help you. That's all it is. Now, at the end of our time, I'll argue that it is a spiritual growth tool, or at least it can be a spiritual growth tool. But if you don't know your type, and if you're curious, the great news for you is you don't know anything about this. We've set it up that you can take a free assessment. And we want you to do that today, right after the service, or sometime this week. We want you to do that. We want you to go to bridgechurches.ca/Enneagram. And if you go there, when you go there after the service, don't do it right now, but you'll just fill out some information and you'll get sent a link to take a free assessment. And anyone can do this, and I would encourage you especially to do it if you're a teenager. If you're a student, I would really encourage you to do this, because students, this is important for you to discover and understand now. This could save you a lot of regret, right? To know thyself now, because it will help you as you go through life today and tomorrow, and it will help you as you navigate your relationships as you move forward with your life. Now, what I want you to know is with all assessments, when you take this, there are no right or wrong answers, so don't try and be like, what's the right answer here, right? And don't always go with C. Don't do that either, okay? But just take it as honestly and openly as you can. And if you do, this free assessment will help you diagnose what type you are. So you'll find out, are you an 8? Are you a 2? Are you a 4? Are you a 1? And hopefully this assessment will help you, and we're going to continue to talk around these ideas for the next 3 weeks. And the other exciting thing that I'm excited to tell you about today, and you've heard a little bit about it earlier, is that the other thing we're going to do is if you go to bridgechurches.ca/groups, there you can download a free discussion guide, and we want you to talk about these ideas, right? We want you to talk about these ideas in your home, or maybe grab some friends online, or in the context of your small group. And our goal, hopefully, and why we're doing this entire series, is that hopefully this will all give you an understanding of yourself, an understanding of God, and a way of seeing God differently and deeper. So let me run through these types quickly, and after the service, take the assessment, download the discussion guide, and let's take this journey of self-discovery and God discovery together. So type 1, if you're a 1, you're a perfectionist. You're the perfectionist, and it drives you crazy that there isn't one more roll of toilet paper on this little hill here, right? 1s are perfectionists. They're the type of people that come into your house, or at least they used to, and then there's this picture, on the wall that's just a little bit crooked, and they fix it, or at least they want to fix it. They have that urge because they're perfectionists. And 1s are amazing. They're amazing. They're perfectionists. You want them in your home. When that day comes, you want them to come back to your home. You want them on your team. You hope that your bookkeeper is a 1, or at least I hope that's what you hope, because all those digits, they've got to be in the right column, right? They've got to be in the right place, and that's what a 1 does. They make great interior designers, right? You want them to organize your kitchen, because then everything is right. Everything has its place, right? You've heard people say that. That's a perfectionist. So let them take care of that. Let them take care of your closets too, because everything will be perfect, because they're perfectionists. They just do that. They just want to make everything better. They want to make everything right. They want to make everything ideal. And so they work at it. And I've worked with 1s. We have a 1 on our team. And I'll tell you, as a leader, working with 1s, I love having 1s on my team, because with a 1, you can be confident, not that it's going to get done, they'll do that, but it'll be done right. They're just amazing that way. However, everyone's got a shadow side. Everyone has a shadow side, and everyone has a shadow side. And we'll look at why there's a shadow side next week. Now, for 1s can be very self-critical, just like they're critical of the environments they find themselves in. They have this negative loop that just goes on and on and on in their head, and it just plays over and over and over again about everything that's wrong. And because of that negativity they experience, that negativity they feel, they can oftentimes be difficult to be around. So that's the perfectionist. And all of these personality types in the assessment, when you take it, they rank them as healthy, autopilot, and unhealthy. And I think that's very true, right? That as you grow, you become healthier, right? And there's healthy, there's autopilot, and then there's unhealthy. But as you grow, you become healthier spiritually, healthier emotionally, and you'll embody more of the good characteristics and qualities of your personality and begin to become aware of, noticing, and eliminating some of those bad ones. So you can transcend this. This truly is a tool. It's a growth path. Okay? So that's the perfectionist. Type 2 is the helper. And helpers are awesome. They're the people that you can just call up on a whim and say, hey, I need a hand moving. And they're like, yeah, I'm there. And they'll just drop what they're doing, and they love doing that. And I've had a 2 in my life for my entire life. My mom, she's a 2, and she is amazing. And people love her, always have, always will, because she's awesome, and she's a helper. And over the years, I've watched my mom, she'll drop whatever it is she's doing to help someone else. Now, the shadow side for my mom and all other 2s is that oftentimes they don't pay attention to their own needs, and they can burn out because they have unclear boundaries. But my mom, 2s, helpers, they're awesome. And I'm thankful for the 2s in my life. And Mom, if you're watching, I just want you to know, I love you. Okay, now number 3, let's move on. Number 3 is the performer. And as I mentioned, I'm a 3. Didn't guess that, right? But 3s, we're ambitious and energetic, driven for advancement. And as I've studied this, what's funny is if you look at leadership, at least, this is an unscientific study, but if you look at it, 3s, 7s, and 8s usually end up running things all the time. Starting things, running things, because 3s are driven. They'll start things. They make great salespeople. However, 3s, we're afraid of failure. And sometimes, because we're afraid of failure, when we're in an unhealthy place, 3s will shade the truth a little bit. If they get to that unhealthy place, their shadow side, because they don't want to look like failures, sometimes they'll do things or they'll say things to make it look like they're successful, even when they're not. And see, that's the shadow side of a 3. And again, we all have a shadow side, every single one of us, but that's the shadow side of a 3. And then we move on, then we have the romantic. This is the type 4. The romantics, they're the artists, the poets, the musicians, the dreamers, the entrepreneurs. These are people who, they feel everything and they want to leave their unique fingerprint on the world. They're creative, they're reserved, they can be sensitive and self-aware, and yet they often feel misunderstood. And if you're not a 4, you'll know when you're talking to a 4, when you hear things like, you don't understand me, or you don't get me. And because they feel misunderstood, oftentimes they can feel neglected by you or by the rest of the world that didn't see their talent and their beauty. And they can be like a hamster on a wheel, kind of trapped in this wheel of self-pity and self-indulgence. That's the life of a 4. That's the life of a romantic. And then we move on to number 5, the investigator. Just a cool name, right? The investigator. These are people, they're super smart, they're brilliant. They analyze information, synthesize information, they're researchers, and they love it. And the funny thing is, if you do the free assessment, which again, I encourage you to do today after the service, it actually ranks all of your Enneagram types in order. So you get a score for each number, and it kind of shows you in order. So I'm a 3 at the top with an 8 wing, and at the very bottom for me, you guessed it, the very bottom is a 5, right? So they say that the goal of leadership is to aspire to be the dumbest person in the room. And I'm proud of the fact that I do that on the daily, okay? But 5s are great. 5s are great. They can be very warm and loving, but sometimes they're a little bit detached. And sometimes they're a little bit hard to get to know, which is sad, again, because 5s, they're brilliant. And they work so hard. And yet, as I said, there's a shadow side. With every one of these types, there's a shadow side, and every personality type has one. And for 5s, for them, it's this fear that they won't have enough. They have this overwhelming fear that they're not going to have enough, that they won't have enough. And so they have this tendency, this bent to be greedy or to hoard, not like hoarders, but like to hoard. And some people might say they're cheap. It's not necessarily because they're cheap, well, they could be, but it's because they're afraid. They're afraid of not having enough because they're always thinking and planning and investigating and worrying about what could happen. And so you're talking to an investigator, you hear things, now I need to keep this, because of a need that I might have, and I don't want to get there and not have enough. So that's the life of the investigator. And then there's the loyalist. The loyalist. And Ian Cron, who writes this book, he says in his studies in preparation, it's amazing, it's a great book, but he thinks that 40% of the population are loyalists, are type 6s. I don't know how we got to that number, because these don't break down take 100% of the population and divide it by 9. That's not how it works. But anyway, in his studies, he thinks that a lot of people are loyalists. And these are interesting, amazing people because at first they can come off as really critical, right? At the beginning, they seem really critical. When you unveil a new idea, maybe to your spouse or to someone on the team, they'll be like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And they can seem like really, really critical, like hypercritical. But once they're in for life. And they make amazing friends. They make amazing friends because they're loyalists. They're so loyal. They might be the last person in, but they're the last person out. Like once they commit, they're there. Loyalists are tremendous, tremendous people. And maybe like you, over the years, I've sat on boards, I've worked on a lot of different teams, and as I've read this book, as I've looked at the assessment, as I kind of reflect on all of this stuff, I think if I had that sentiment, if I had known then what I know now, I'd probably be less afraid of or less annoyed by the person who asks all the questions up front, because maybe, just maybe they're a loyalist, and maybe they're just testing the waters to see if all this is sound, and then once they're in, that's the loyalist. And then there's the enthusiast, type 7, and they have the best Instagram ever, because every day is a new adventure for an enthusiast. It's like, look at me, I'm snowshoeing, and now I've invented, this wicker basket that holds my collection of throwing knives, and here's me driving without a mask, and now I'm throwing an online party, but actually I'm the party, I'm the life of the party, right? That's an Enneagram 7, and they're awesome people to have in your life. They're awesome people to be around because they're just fun. They see life as an adventure. They're unpredictable, they're fun, they're spontaneous, but deep down, they're afraid of failing. They're the life of the party. They might be the life of your life, but they're constantly fearing, what if I fail? What if I make a mistake? That's the enthusiast. And then number 7 is the challenger, which is type 8. Now, as I said, I'm not an 8, but 8 is my wing, so I can relate to an 8. And 8s like to be in control. They like to drive. They want to be in command. 8s can walk into a room and own it. And another thing about 8s, they can smell your fear and your weakness a mile away, right? 8s make great lawyers. They can walk into the courtroom and be like, I know where the loophole is. And then they decimate people in cross-examination. And to them, it's fun, right? It's like, I'm going to tear them apart. And it's like, if you've ever watched the show Suits, like Harvey Specter is an 8, right? But the only problem for Harvey and for others like him, that works great in the courtroom, but it doesn't work so great in relationships, especially in marriage. So if you're an 8, if you're a Harvey, here's a tip for you. Maybe this is the whole reason you came today. Don't cross-examine your spouse or your children or your friends or your pastor, okay? Because you'll have no friends. It's an easy way to lose friends, and it's an easy way to de-influence people, okay? But at the same time, when you look at challengers are often, when they're healthy, they have this fear of vulnerability. So the beautiful thing about an 8 is they have a tender heart, but the sad thing is only a few people get to see it. But once you're in for life. And then there's the number 9, type 9. This is the mediator. Okay, and as I said, Lisa, my wife, she's a 9, so if you're a 9, you're in good company. And with Lisa, with a 9, it's like, hey, where do you want to go for dinner? Or like now it's like, where do you want to skip the dishes from, right? Like it's that whole thing. It's like, where do you want to eat? What do you want to eat? And she's like, I don't know, what do you want to eat? It's like, make a decision. No, you go ahead. What movie do you want to watch? Oh, I don't know, whatever it is you want to watch. They're the peacemaker. They're the people. They're great to have in your life. They're great to have in your family because they're like, oh, that's not a big deal. Doesn't matter what happens, doesn't matter what's said, they can just kind of brush it off, they can put it aside. It's like, I just want everybody to get along, it's not a big deal. And then the 8's like, yes it is, and they're grabbing the steering wheel and wanting to go back and talk about it, right? It's like, no, it's not a big deal. In fact, if you're a 9, you'd probably say something like this, you know what, maybe I'm a 9, but if you think I'm a 4, it's okay, I'll be a 4. I'll be a 4 for you, right? They're just like that. They're peacemakers, they're mediators. They just want everybody to be happy and for everybody to get along, and they want to avoid conflict at all cost. Okay, so there you have it. There's the 9 Enneagram types, and maybe right now you've had a, that's me moment, or maybe someone who's watching with you said, that's you. And so, these brief descriptions maybe have helped you, but over the course of this series, you'll get to know thyself more and more over time, as well as God, which brings us back to what John Calvin said at the very beginning. He said, again, without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. And without knowledge of God, there is no knowledge of self. And so I hope today that you'll take the assessment later today, maybe later this week. And I hope that you'll download the discussion guide and talk about these ideas with the people in your home. Or again, gather some people together online. Just spark up a conversation. Hey, you guys want to chat tonight? You want to get on a call? Do that whole thing. Or maybe do this, in the context of your small group. And hopefully by the end of this series, you'll learn something about yourself and the people that you care about. So next week, we're going to look at why you don't do what you intend to do. Next week, we're going to look at what's the shadow side of your wiring, of your personality. And then in week 3, we're going to look at how do we see the good in others? How do we actually see the image of God in others? How do we recognize that? Because you know what? Understanding that maybe the differences we experience aren't deficiencies. Maybe they're actually God's design. And if we could understand that, wouldn't that make our marriages better? If we could understand that, wouldn't that make us better parents? If we could understand that, maybe would that make our working relationships and our friendships better? I think it would. And then in week 4, the amazing Lisa, she's going to come and join me, and we're going to talk about what all this looks like in our home and in our marriage. And that's the journey that we're going to be on together. And as I said, I hope that you'll join us for all of it. So at the end of this series, when it's all said and done, you would know thyself better than you ever have before. And more importantly than that, you might know your Heavenly Father more and deeper than you ever have before. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for the opportunity to be together in this way, in this platform today with so many amazing people out there who are uniquely created in your image. And God, we all have big questions about ourselves, about life and the meaning of all this. And I pray, Father, that over these next few weeks together, as we look deeper into your word and deeper into who we are and how we are wired, I pray, God, for some amazing revelations. And I pray that, God, relationships would be deepened. And I pray that as people look at themselves in the mirror, they see themselves in your image and see themselves as here on purpose, for purpose, in a way they never have before. God, I pray for powerful conversations that will happen as a result of this, that marriages would get stronger and parents and children's relationships would get better and grandparents and other, all these dynamics and workplaces would be better, and that, God, we would see ourselves in a new way and see others in a way that we never have before. So we pray for all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
Well, that's our service. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as Scott mentioned, we want to make sure you head over to bridgechurches.ca/groups to get your discussion guide there. And once you've done that, head over to bridgechurches.ca/Enneagram to make sure you can take your assessment and you can find out what number you are. It will spark some very interesting discussions at home, I promise. Well, I hope to have you back here next week as we are in week 2 of Know Thyself. Until then, God bless and have a great week.